What's up everybody, we're back in Uldir with another raid guide, and today we're taking a look at the final boss, G'huun on Mythic difficulty. For this encounter you want 2 tanks, 5 healers, and 13 DPS. Ideally you'd want 4 warlocks, 1 windwalker, 1 mistweaver, and 1 brewmaster monk, and a few boomkins doesn't hurt. Why? Well, I'll go over that in a bit. So before we start talking about the encounter itself, we need to address the orbs and the gauntlets. And if you're not interested in that, just skip ahead a bit as it will be a bit of a rant. So a big difference from heroic to mythic is that you need to do both the gauntlets at the same time, and you need to deliver the orbs at the same time. Meaning you will need 6 groups of 2 instead of 3 groups of 2 per beam. And on top of this, there are routes in the gauntlet that travels from cyst to cyst, and if you touch one you will be rooted for 10 seconds. Which is, well, it's not awesome. So in total for the encounter you will need 5 groups of 4, 2 for the left gauntlet and 2 for the right gauntlet. And this means most players will have to do the gauntlet twice during this encounter. However, due to recent changes, some classes are now able to solo the gauntlet in Mythic as well, like your monk, demon hunter, and warriors. So if you're running any of these classes, just put them as solo runners, it will help a lot with timings. I'll go over why in a bit. So back to the gauntlets. To make things as easy as possible for any and all gauntlets, you want 4 warlocks. Yes, 4. 2 warlocks are mandatory, 4 warlocks is awesome. It is still doable with only 2 or 3, but with 4 warlocks you get 2 gateways per gauntlet. So you will have 1 gateway for whoever picks up the orb, and a few yards away the 2nd gateway for whoever turns the orb in. So you'll have 1 player picking up the orb, presses the gateway, throws the orb to the 2nd player, who in turn uses the 2nd gateway and lands right next to the engine, and when the other side is ready, they both dunk the orb. If done correctly, the whole lane takes roughly 14 to 20 seconds, and when both the left lane and right lane are next to the engine, both of them turns it in at the same time. If you don't have 4 warlocks, you can handle it like you do in heroic. However, to complicate things a bit for you, as I mentioned earlier, you want a couple of boomkins, a lot of warlocks, and a few monks, and this is because these classes can jump up to the middle of the gauntlet, so they don't need to run around everything, meaning faster gauntlets and more uptime on G'huun. So to do this, warlocks will want to place their demonic circles close to the edge in the middle of whichever gauntlet they're assigned to. Monks use transcendence, and druids will need a bit of help. They can wild charge to a friendly target, and the friendly target here is a monk statue, either the healing statue or the brewmaster statue. The statue will need to be placed just like the warlock circle so that the moonkins can charge it. Friendly tip, you need to be out of boomkin form to charge him. If you have any rogues, they can also shadow step to these statues. If you don't have monk statues, well then you can actually use warlock pets. Just place them so that the druids and rogues can step to him. So in phase 2 it's pretty much the same. You will have 1 player who runs up to the orb and picks it up, and 1 player who jumps up to the middle. Other than that, you deal with it the same way. Player 1 gets the orb, uses gateway, throws to 2nd player who uses gateway and turns it in at the same time as the other side. Piece of cake, right? What could go wrong? And on that note, group number 6 and 9 will want to turn in their orbs during a blood feast. This is especially important for the 9th group, as you want to transition to phase 3 after that. And this is so you don't have any stacks when you reach phase 3. If you do this without any solo runners at all, then the 6th and 9th group will turn their orbs in a bit after the 2nd and 4th blood feast. However, if you have access to 4 solo runners, you can get around that. If you have 4 solo lanes in phase 1 and phase 2, you can switch around the later groups a bit so that you'll always be able to turn in the 6th and 9th orb directly when the blood feast spawns. It makes it a lot easier and less healing intense. By no means is it necessary, it's just easier. And that's pretty much it for the gauntlet. If you want our gauntlet setup order, hit me up on Facebook and I'll get it for you. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the actual fight. Starting off with phase 1. It's pretty much heroic plus the infested affix from Mythic Plus, meaning any ad you kill will spawn G'huun worms. Those worms will in turn try and infest players. If they're successful, that player will get a dot, and when removed, 2 new worms spawn. On top of this, everything hurts a lot. The torment that the corrupted terrors cast is no joke. If left unchecked, they can actually one-shot players. So, what you want to do is assign a few DPS to each and every corrupted terror that is up when phase 1 starts. They will be in charge of killing/interrupting that ad and dealing with the G'huun worms that spawn. Try and interrupt and stun them when they're below 50%, as they do more damage the less HP they have, or rather, the more stacks they have. Range should be positioned far back so that if a worm fixates them, they will have a long way to run before they can infest them. After a little bit, 3 more corrupted terrors will spawn close to the left gauntlet ramp. Same thing here, kill them and interrupt them. So we just kept marking any ad that needed to die fast with a skull. And any other ads that spawned during the fight we just ignored, we interrupted and stunned them. And just like in Heroic, there's actually no need whatsoever to DPS the Dark Young or the Blight Spreader Tendril. Just use the Dark Young for damage increase and make sure to interrupt and tank the Blight Spreader. If the gauntlets are done correctly and you've handled all the terrors, you will transition to phase 2. A few things about phase 1 though. The thing you will wipe on here is the terrors, one-shotting people. If they aren't interrupted or stunned when they have high stacks/low HP, they will one-shot people, so I can't stress that enough. Make sure they are interrupted. Make sure you have someone calling out interrupts as needed and marking terrors that needs to die. So, let's take a look at the transition to phase 2. Here's where it gets awesome. The beam will stun and kill everything that is up, meaning you will get a swarm of G'huun worms during that blast. However, unlike any other ad or G'huun itself, they don't get stunned by the beam. So to deal with this, the entire raid stacks on one spot to funnel the worms towards you, and you just use slows, pushbacks, and Ring of Peace to make sure they never reach the raid. If you have a Blood DK or a Vengeance Demon Hunter, he or she should use Mass Grip here to stack him up nicely. Aim to kill him off before G'huun crawls out of the you-know-what in the wall and phase 2 starts. So, phase 2, G'huun. Few new things here to take note of. First and foremost is the bursting boils. Every now and then, 3 boils will spawn at random locations around G'huun. These boils will apply a stacking dot to the 2 players closest to each boil, and if a player ever gets 2 stacks, they will get mind controlled and will need to be killed. Needless to say, you want to avoid mind controls. The boils can spawn anywhere except under G'huun and on the gauntlets, which makes them a pain to handle. Other than that, we have the Gibbering Horror ad. Works the same way as in Heroic with a slight buff. It spawns a big patch of blighted ground and a lot of G'huun worms when it dies, and it will resurrect after 50 seconds if it isn't killed during a reorigination blast or if its corpse is there during a blast. Other than that, there's no explosive corruption and double gauntlets. Otherwise, it's the same good old phase 2. So, how do we deal with all of this? Well, there's a few different ways to deal with the bursting boils. Everything from weak auras, marking the boils for assigned groups, or free-for-all-ish. We went with the free-for-all approach on the boils, meaning if you can soak, then you should soak a boil. If you have a debuff, then get far away from any boils so you don't get mind control. As I mentioned earlier, the boils apply their dot to the 2 players closest to them. So in many cases, it's enough with just having people who can't soak move away. However, if 2 of them spawns very close to each other or 1 spawns very far away, it's usually safer to have players run out to them. If 2 boils spawns close to each other, then you really need to make sure 2 players per boil stands on them to avoid mind controls. And during Blood Feast, if you have the debuff so you can't soak, then you need to stand dead center in the Blood Feast to make sure you don't get mind controlled. Keep in mind that a single player can be the closest player to multiple boils, which is why it's important to adapt to how they spawn and always communicate. We split our raid up in a couple of groups and positioned them around the room and placed 1 raid marker per group, along with a few other raid marks. Every group was in charge of the area around the raid mark, meaning if there's one on their mark, they soak it. If there's multiple boils, they make sure to call out if help is needed. As I said, communication will make this so much easier. Anytime a boil spawns far away, let everyone know. If one boil only has 1 player close to it, call for backup. And have fun with that. And when you're done playing with the boils, you will need to turn your focus to the Blood Feast and the Gibbering Horror. Like in Heroic, you want to bait the Blood Feast, meaning when it's about to be cast, you have everyone stack in front of the boss. Ideally, you want just around 12 players or less to clear their stacks on the first and third Blood Feast. This is to make sure that the Gibbering Horror doesn't have too much HP. And this is because you actually need to kill the first and the third Gibbering Horror yourself. So as soon as it spawns, everyone needs to focus it down and kill it before it wipes the raid, because if it gets 3 or 4 casts off on mind-numbing shatter, well, it's probably a wipe. So you want to have a set order for who soaks the first and third Blood Feast and who stays out of it. Warlocks, demon hunters, healers, and tanks, among other, are prime candidates for this. Just keep in mind, if you don't clear your stacks on the first and third feast, you have to clear it on the second and fourth. So yeah, back to the Blood Feast. You want one of your tanks to pick up the Gibbering Horror and tank it next to the boss, and when it's about to die, that tank needs to drag it away from the boss and you kill it off there. This is just to keep some distance between the raid and the G'huunis, as well as controlling where you get the blighted ground. And the second and fourth Blood Feast will always be coupled with a reorigination blast, so DPSing those ads is a waste. The beam will finish them and clear any blighted ground. The only thing you need to worry about is killing any of the G'huunis that spawn. Again, if you have a Blood DK or Vengeance Demon Hunter, they can just mass grip the small worms during phase 2 blasts into the boss and away from the raid. All in all, you will have 2 beams in phase 2. You want to make sure that the boss transitions to phase 3 after the second beam in phase 2 is done, which is 20%. If done correctly, you'll go from beam to transition, which makes things a bit easier. The big thing here is really the boils. The faster you're able to get them under control, the faster phase 2 will be. The rest of phase 2 isn't that tricky really. Make sure that the gauntlets are fast and consistent, make sure you nuke down the first and third Gibbering Horror fast, and again, handle the boils. A side note on this, during the second beam in phase 2, you don't want to use any DPS cooldowns that are longer than 1 minute, because they won't be up in phase 3, and you will need them. Overall DPS check in phase 2 is pretty non-existent due to the beams. If you've made it to G'huun, then you have enough DPS. I just want to, again, stress out the boils in phase 2. This is where you will most likely wipe. This is where you'll get pissed off at each other, and this is where your focus needs to be. They should be your number 1 priority. If you can soak, you should always aim to soak. Even if you need to cleanse during a Blood Feast, or there's a beam going on, or you need to kill an ad, or whatever, you make sure to soak. Because what it really all boils down to, if you can soak, you soak. So, let's take a look at the final phase. As soon as G'huun reaches 20%, it will start using Collapse. This one hurts a lot in Mythic. So what you want to do is have your raid stack up far away from G'huun to force the first Collapse to spawn at that location. Run over to a new mark, spawn a new Collapse there, run or use gateways back to the first mark you stacked on, and stay there for the third and fourth Collapse. And after this, it's off to phase 3, which is pretty much a burn phase. So it's exactly the same as it is in Heroic, with bursting boils. However, the boils are a lot simpler to deal with due to the fact that you don't have any orb runners in this phase, so a lot more players are able to soak. So what you want to do in this phase is simply position G'huun in the middle, have predetermined spots for everyone that they should try and stay on. You can either have your raid always dodge malignant growths clockwise, or that after you've dodged them you move back to your original position. And you handle the bursting boils the same way here as you did in phase 2. The hardest part in this phase is the malignant growths and wave of corruption. If you're not careful, it's very easy to run towards a safe spot and accidentally get too close to another player during a wave, resulting in 2 or more players getting knocked into growths, and they'll probably die. So it's very important that you're vocal and play nice, meaning if you move into a safe spot during the growths, keep moving to ensure any players behind you can also get in without knocking you both away. Always make sure that when you've made it into a safe zone, other players can as well without being too close. Other than that, nuke, and burn it down before you die from Wave of Corruption stacks. We popped Bloodlust a few seconds into phase 3, and we had our healers and tanks soak the very first set of boils to ensure our DPS could burn the boss as much as possible during Bloodlust. Other than that, we assigned 2 groups of 3 players to always be on the lookout for boils during phase 3 and to prioritize them. We use hunters, fire mages, and boomkins for this, seeing as hunters and mages can pretty much run and DPS at the same time, and boomkins are sad outside of cooldowns and Bloodlust. Other than that, I just have some information for tanks and healers. You will need healing cooldowns for every beam and transition, as well as when the corruption stacks gets high before a blood feast, and for the later stages in phase 3. For you tanks out there, you can tank swap on cooldown to reduce tank damage if there's not a gibbering horror up. If there's an add up, one tank takes the add and one tank takes G'huun. The add tank will taunt G'huun every now and then, and the other tank taunts it back immediately after G'huun has lost its buff. And in phase 3, it's back to taunting off on cooldown again. And that's pretty much it for G'huun. Sorry for the rant, but I wanted to be as thorough as possible, and I couldn't think of a way to make it shorter without losing a lot of info. But if you have any questions at all about setup, weak auras, or anything, make sure to hit me up in the comments below or on Facebook, and I'll try to answer them as well as I can. On that note, I just wanted to say thank you for watching my Uldir guides. It's been really fun reading the comments and people posting on Facebook, especially when you post that you've killed a boss. It's just really fun to read, and I appreciate it a lot. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave me a like, and ring that notification bell and switch it to all. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the Siege of Dazar Alor.